Welcome everyone to a new episode of the FinOps Weekly podcast, and today we are going to talk about one of the most difficult challenges that enterprises figure out today, and it's the hybrid cloud and the hybrid FinOps challenge. So when the cloud expertise and the cloud FinOps is not enough. And for helping us today with this challenge, we have Jeremy Chaplin from Flexera. Jeremy, how are you?
Very good, Victor. Thank you ever so much, and excited to be back on FinOps Weekly podcast. Very much looking forward to our conversation this afternoon.
Yeah, I think you are the first one that repeats in our podcast, which is amazing, and you have that
very honored.
yeah. It's always there is only one first one, so this is great, and we are going to talk about something that I think worries most of the companies, especially the big ones that have a hybrid cloud, so something part on premise, something on private cloud, and on public cloud. So, what do you think? To start with direct question is, what do you think are the main challenges that arise from having hybrid cloud FinOps instead of cloud only FinOps, where you only can have the CSPs that we all know, and now we have to interact between the on-prem or the private cloud and the public cloud for doing this optimization?
It's a real challenge, isn't it? And already I think when I started getting involved in FinOps, and the focus was on that collaboration with a broad range of stakeholders. Public cloud was touching everything, right, all the way down to engineering. And I came from a kind of ITAM background where we probably didn't end up speaking to engineers at the end of the day, and so that was a kind of paradigm shift a little bit in terms of the breadth there. But now, as we see the framework including other scopes of private cloud, data center, SaaS management as well, I think that we're increasing even further the breadth of the engagement and collaboration that we're trying to achieve. And so doing that across the inform, optimize, operate life cycle ultimately becomes more challenging. And I'm sure we'll get into that, but the challenges in tooling and visibility and the different levers and things that ultimately we need to pull, or at least bring together to have an aggregate understanding, presents real challenges, mostly I guess in organizational collaboration as much as anything else.
Yeah, that's true. I think like whenever you change the paradigm from a cloud perspective to something that licensing, which is what we are going to talk about a bit, it's so different than the cloud and so different than the SaaS platform, which work in a totally different consumption way. That you need to put a different perspective of the whole FinOps that is out of cloud, right?
Totally, yeah. And everybody kind of likes to stay in their lane, don't they, to some degree, right? I mean, we spoke earlier just before we started about people that have spent a lifetime doing license management, and they understand all the nuances and terms and conditions and the taxonomy and all of the three-letter acronyms in the Microsoft licensing space, for example, that me as a FinOps practitioner and heavily focused on public cloud would never have an opportunity even to scratch the surface in terms of understanding. And so it's how do we leverage, I guess, the expertise that those other folks have developed, and be collaborative rather than trying to kind of reinvent the wheel or redevelop an understanding myself. I would never be successful unless I brought in the right people to work with to leverage their expertise in their domain as well.
That's true. I think maybe we are seeing like a more specialization of FinOps since we are expanding what the practice is doing, like from cloud to all the different steps. Now we are integrating like with other roles that before weren't mentioned in the context of FinOps or were fairly mentioned, such as you mentioned the ITAM or even the SaaS. Like the SaaS could be even different, or the AI part. So you can do FinOps for AI very good, but not FinOps for cloud. So let's start with these domains, and let's go step by step so that people understand what are the difference. So starting with the licensing, which is one of the topics that we have started, what do you think are the fundamental difference between cloud FinOps and ITAM or this license management for controlling the cost?
Yeah, no, great question. And in the public cloud space, particularly as it's kind of been technically focused, We think about provisioning infrastructure. We think of this kind of mentality with a pay-as-you-go mentality on, right? I can put down a credit card and I can access all of the things that I need. And I think the cloud vendors love that. And of course, we love the flexibility and the agility that affords. I don't need to separately go and buy a Windows server or a SQL license from Microsoft to get up and running if I don't need to. And the same for Oracle, and the same for, the plethora of things that are in marketplaces, across the cloud vendors. But the reality is, for most enterprises, at least, that have been in business for many years, they own those licenses, right? They've had a whole procurement process and probably a team of people that are managing license compliance, from an audit perspective, from a, cost saving perspective. Are we using these efficiently? Have we got licenses that kind of overlap with each other? Have we bought things that, we could reconcile, down to single licenses and so on? So there's a lot of different lenses that we can look at that problem through, but historically, at least my experience says, those in the public cloud space typically haven't thought about it too much. But the reality then is, that actually we did some research, internally. We saw of the cloud spend that Flexera had under management, over 5% of it was on two products, which was Microsoft Windows Server, Microsoft SQL Server. So of all of the cloud spend, 5% pay as you go on those operating systems and databases, and another 20% of our customers' spend is in marketplace. And so if we're not working with our software asset management counterparts, right, the people that do manage that procurement cycle, the people that do know the nuances of what they own and how I might use it in public cloud, there's basically a quarter of your cloud bill you're ruling out from an optimization perspective. So yeah, that's really kind of where I see the challenges are in terms of gaining that understanding, bringing those teams up together. I, as a public cloud practitioner, won't know the nuances of Windows licensing to know whether I can use it in public cloud or whether I can't, and how many CPUs I need to count for a SQL license and so on, right? It's pretty complicated stuff. So.
Yeah, indeed. And also something that brought up in a conversation that I had with another practitioner is that talking with these people that have a different role may help you even improve as a FinOps in your cloud role. And I can put on a specific example, which is negotiating contracts with cloud providers, because they are very used, like item people or licensing people, procurement people are way more used to license management and license negotiation, that when you are in this contract management, like the Microsoft program or the AWS program, the GCP, they will be much better than you doing this negotiation, that you can leverage them to lend you a hand on this, right?
Absolutely, yeah. No, it's a great point. And that whole contract negotiation, particularly with, we use the term mega vendor, right? But someone like Microsoft, where they're doing public cloud, they're doing SaaS, they're doing on-premise licensing, in order to have a successful negotiation, you need to know the holistic view, right? What am I spending on all of those domains? Because ultimately, it's the aggregate of that cost that is going to that vendor, and you should leverage that for negotiation. There was a really interesting example that came up recently, obviously anonymity for the customer that this was about, but they had negotiated an all-you-could-eat kind of license agreement for certain key products from Microsoft. And yet, we saw a significant amount of pay-as-you-go spend in the public cloud space. So they've, spent a lot of time in the procurement cycles and negotiating to get this all-we-can-eat licensing, but then they're not leveraging it, right? They're paying again, which is not untypical for us to see. And it's still relatively early days, I guess, right? So procurement, getting involved in the kind of public cloud conversation, EDP negotiation, also becoming something that we're seeing partners, provide a role for their customers for as well. So.
Yeah, definitely, and I think it's getting there. Like the expansion, I think for FinOps is very early. So till, as I know, till enterprises are able to integrate something like a practice or a technology like happened with cloud, it takes time. So it will take like its 10 years or more to have everything like mature and figured out, and then from there we are starting the maturity level and then evolve. So moving on to like a second cost driver that is very different from cloud, which is SaaS. SaaS, it's probably one of the highest the hottest topics from past year, I think, in FinOps, especially on the FinOps X Barcelona and on San Diego. That it's driving a lot of costs, especially certain observability tools, data analysis tools, etc., that ingest a lot of information, and they drive a lot of cost. So for SaaS tools, what are your perspective, which are like what are the challenges to analyze and to do FinOps for SaaS tools?
Yeah, again, it's an interesting domain, isn't it? And there's a lot of confusion, I think, often when we talk about SaaS, particularly in the FinOps space. So the number of people that I've spoken to and said, how do you manage SaaS? And they immediately think about marketplace, right? That would be the initial, that's the SaaS side of things for a public cloud, or FinOps practitioner. And then, historically here at Flexera, well, what was SaaS? Well, it was your Office 365s, your Salesforce, your ServiceNow, right? All of those typical SaaS platforms. But, I think certainly, obviously, the AI aspect has blurred the lines between what is SaaS and what is public cloud. I'm quite interested actually to see the FinOps Foundation come up with data clouds as a domain or a taxonomy, because I would have called those, Snowflake and Databricks actually SaaS applications, and I think that they do themselves. But there becomes then a difference, right? So, what was historically, in the typical business SaaS domain was possibly, per unit pricing on a per user basis, consumption-based pricing possibly, or outcome-based pricing as well. But that's shifted, right? The public cloud was always a price times quantity thing, and so I think we're now seeing the data clouds, if you treat them as SaaS, ultimately then becoming completely different, right? How much data am I indexing? How many API calls am I making? How many queries are you running against these services? And then not just the data clouds, but then the SaaS-based AI services, Meta and others. Well, how do you start to measure and understand, both the price and the quantity of those kind of things, given all of the different dimensions that are being introduced? What about you, Victor? I'm interested in your view on the whole data cloud piece as well. I didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, so the data cloud, it's a different thing. I think it's super important. There are like companies built upon data, especially now that everyone can get like a lot of data from the internet with all the AI scraping, all the information. So there is a lot of information, especially with IoT devices, all these things. And the thing, I think there is a paradox here, is that there are data tools that work like SaaS, that are embedded within the cloud providers, which is like BigQuery, QuickSight, if you can do it that way. And on Microsoft, I don't remember what is, but I think there is one and I don't remember one. But there are, all the providers have this tool because they use it. Because BigQuery is probably the backbone of most of what Google does. And AWS, of course, with QuickSight does a lot of things. So they are probably, BigQuery especially is the biggest, I think one of the biggest cost drivers for this type of data clouds. I think it's probably the biggest one. So you have the interaction between SaaS and cloud here, which is a very difficult thing to manage, because you can have like the SaaS tools working on like on-prem or similar things, or custom, let's say, deployments, and then you have it on cloud, which is Databricks on each of the cloud providers. So that's like quite a challenge. I don't know how you are thinking about it, but for me it's like quite a challenge to figure out.
Yeah, so a lot of those vendors are making their services available via the public clouds as well, and in some degrees it makes it easier. So if I've already got tooling that gives me visibility of all the cloud services, then I can start to see some of those, AI based or what we would call SaaS based or data cloud based services in my own cloud bill. But often that's not the case, and it's then, it's a whole new bill to ingest. It's a whole new, a whole new domain to understand. How is it billed? How is it priced? What are the levers I can pull? Can I normalize it into a common taxonomy? Is it, focus compliant and all of that good stuff? And so those are the challenges that we're trying to solve here. Ultimately, is it almost it almost looks like the process we went through with Kubernetes, right? So it was just another abstraction of spend that we already had, and I needed to get another layer of granularity kind of to the namespace or even to the container level to start to understand and break down that bill. And we're just repeating the process here, but with a whole load of different kind of metrics and measures, behind the data consumption. So it's certainly interesting times as we look to solve that problem.
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe in these type of tools, probably FinOps, like analyst or whatever you want to call that role, have an advantage because they are used to deal with similar things for analyzing the billing data. Well, BigQuery was basically, I'm not sure if it is still, but for GCP, BigQuery was the export. You need to do it on Focus. So you need to deal with these type of people. I recall like Anderson Oliveira's work on Databricks for Azure with Focus. So everyone in FinOps is kind of related to these tools. So there is probably like an easier development here from FinOps, and they could probably handle better than, for example, compute optimization or, as you said, Kubernetes. I think Kubernetes, you need to have domain expertise because it's very difficult. To do the optimizations, to do the cost allocation, for example. If you have like shared workloads in Kubernetes, you need to know what you're doing. So I think maybe here, FinOps like analysts could have an advantage. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. I was watching actually a recording of one of the sessions, I think, that had been done on AI, which is of course one of the areas that really spans all of these domains, from Mike Fuller and others at the foundation. And they started out saying, look, you probably know more than you think you do, right? So, that's the starting position here, is having done this, for public cloud, you're in a really good space, right? You understand the complexity, you understand the nuances, and you understand the terminology. I think it just, for me, just means that you have to be open to a new wave of learning almost, right? And just kind of, again, understanding the levers of, how is it licensed, right? How is it true SaaS? Is it per seat? Is it per user? Is it per query? Are we going into AI and it's about data and model optimization? And so it's just a willingness to jump in again and kind of learn all of these new terminology. But actually the framework itself, for good reason, is well positioned to help you through that process, right? So it still becomes an inform, optimize, operate conversation, and the domains and capabilities are no different really. It's just a different abstraction or a different domain, or the KPIs and course of other things that we need to start to learn become different. So it's really embracing change as always.
Yeah, I think it's going to be like, especially with AI, you need to embrace change because and you need to be prepared for, because otherwise you are going to be disrupted every few months. So moving on to AI, but before on that, I want to remind the people that are listening that we have a webinar on the November 13th at 6 p.m. Spain time or 5 p.m. UK time, about that we are going to dive deep into all these cost challenges for hybrid FinOps, that you are going to be here, and we are going to have Gerhard, which is an expert in one of the topics that we have discussed, which is licensing and all this hybrid cloud thing. So we'll leave the link in the description below so you can join, and we'll do a deep dive on SaaS, on licensing, and of course what we are going to talk about, which is AI. So everyone can join in the link below. And Moving on to the hot topic everyone talks about now, and which is AI. So in your perspective, it's been a very talked about topic, but in your perspective, like AI costs, how they are differing from traditional cloud costs that you have seen, and what are the complexities you have seen either from customers or from your personal experience on this topic?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think this has been the real catalyst for the convergence of all of these domains, right? Mm-hmm. So just looking at the numbers from the FinOps Foundation in that webinar, as I say, that recording that I watched, right? So Gartner projecting Gen AI spend to get to 644 billion this year, right? It's massive growth here, and ultimately, the audience, the practitioners in the foundation, have also articulated that it's not just a public cloud problem. So they are using SaaS, they are using data center, they are using private cloud, they are using the data clouds to do this. And so the first one is just recognition that it is a driver behind how do we solve this hybrid cloud problem, right? And it may be the thing that forces organizations to say, yes, I need to bring a SaaS persona in. Yes, I need, my SAM or ITAM person in the room, because the only way we're going to solve this AI problem, which we're being challenged to do ultimately from realizing value, is if we get together. And whilst we've tried to kind of do that for ITAM and SaaS separately, the momentum maybe hasn't been there for all organizations. So I think it's a real catalyst to change and to better bring these things together. But it also then becomes an interesting problem that starts, and you made this point really at the start here about, how do we go and buy this stuff, right? How do we negotiate with a vendor? And in many cases, that nobody knows how to even estimate what they're consuming, right? You go and ask, how many queries are we going to make for Copilot or, ChatGPT or whatever? Nobody knows how to start to even, make a guess at these. And so we're often reliant on the vendor to give us some sort of indication. Oh, you need this tier of, consumption or queries or whatever it might be. So the problem actually starts in buying it. How do we even go around procuring, licensing ourselves when all of these different metrics become part of the conversation? It's no longer, I need 20 licenses because I've got 20 people that are going to use it. It could be actually that you've got AI that is using its own license for these things when you're starting to automate stuff. So a ton of complexity that we're seeing there as we start to think about the breadth. But again, I would encourage people to think about that from a SaaS management perspective, right? If you're not managing the SaaS environment that you have today for business SaaS, when we start thinking about the AI element of all of those platforms you're already using and data clouds and other things, the complexity of what we now would typically say SaaS management is, I think, is going to balloon ultimately.
Definitely. And I think that, I think AI changed the paradigm, especially for SaaS consumption, in from as you mentioned, per user perspective to a consumption base. Like you are now moving a consumption base, which I think what happened to procurement when moving to on-prem to the cloud, that is something that is way more difficult to estimate, especially for the future. Like if you tell 100,000 company employees, tell me, estimate how much AI will be spent in next year, which is probably what they are going to be asked about for procurement, they will know. How are you going to know about that if the models are changing, the pricing of the models are changing every time, the consumption is changing, so the context is longer. So all these cost drivers are going to change, right? Yeah. And it's super different, and it's super difficult to know what's going to happen for companies that they need to know this. They need to do their estimates. They we are we are in the middle of Q4, so that's going to happen, right? What you can say to these people?
I mean, let's face it, right? Budget and forecast in public cloud has been hard enough, I think, right? If I
Yeah.
see, most of my customers and their level of maturity there, it's been really difficult to get, the organization to get their head around P times Q. And that's
Yeah.
when the price and the quantity are relatively well understood, items themselves. So yeah, I think we're going to see again, organizations going back to the crawl, walk, run, right? And so the initial stages is just defining, well, what makes up the price and what makes up the quantity for the the services that we're consuming there, and a real kind of back to basics start as they kind of iterate over that. I think ultimately it's part of the problem in terms of the whole value proposition of AI is, well, how do we define that value, but also how do we measure all of these different things that go to make up, ultimately the cost element, as well as the complexity in measuring the business outcomes, because they're often very non-tangible things, that you're looking to measure.
Yeah, that's true. And I think you brought a very interesting topic, which is like the complexity. The complexity that we are getting now, especially on the cost level for FinOps, like how do you control this? And we can talk about the paradox that it brings, which is like now you have to control more things, so you may need more tools for the different providers, especially big companies with multi-cloud cost, with hybrid cloud cost, like on-prem cost, the SaaS cost. So what can you explain us, like, why having all these tools providing you visibility and trying to figure out things, it could probably lead to that less clarity to a FinOps to be able to see, okay, this is my picture. So why do you think it's going on?
Yeah. Again, it's been an interesting space, and I've spent a lot of time, in the domain, and obviously seen native tools from the cloud vendors grow up and become, really quite capable tools. But we always kind of defend from a Flexera perspective against that, because typically they don't do multi-cloud very well, and they don't interface with other business systems, and they're not necessarily as configurable as third-party tools might be. But when you then start to think, well, all of those other domains, right, what is it that you use for visibility into your data center or private cloud, right? How do you know what the costs are? Where does the usage data come from? How is it exposed, right? This is definitely an area where Excel typically is the tool of choice, right? The most popular FinOps tool on the planet. And then we get the SaaS element, okay? And there's going to be another set of tools, right? There's, of course, market leaders in the space of doing SaaS management as well, because they have their own sets of different criteria, right? We're looking at licensing, we're looking at compliance, we're looking at, whether there are unauthorized users where they've left the organization and they're still using my Office license or whatever it might be. And we're looking at it from a perspective of, in a year's time, I need to renegotiate and understand what my true consumption is and if I'm using the right type of licenses. Whereas what we're trying to do now is bring together that kind of typically license-based discipline, and then the P times Q, the public cloud discipline, and provide visibility of that. And it's a massive tooling challenge. We're fortunate enough to have a consistent data layer across the tools that we have in all of those spaces, but it's still difficult, of course, to start to normalize these things and report on them in a meaningful way. I have discussions with our product managers from SaaS Manager, and I'm saying, well, my FinOps tool is probably the right place to put data cloud data like Snowflake and Databricks, because it's a P times Q thing, and that's not going to make a lot of sense when you compare it against Office licenses and Salesforce, right? So it's really difficult. How do we bring this together? Which ultimately we need to, when we start to say, well, what's the unit cost, or how do I budget and forecast based on a particular service that I'm delivering, when its costs are spread across all of those different hosting domains. So exciting problem to solve, but I think it's definitely a challenge, to bring those tools together.
Yeah, that's cool, and I think that what you mentioned about the visibility and the different the different context, I think what each information should be put, I think makes a lot of a difference between having something that is just pure data and something that is knowledge and insight. So I'm going to dive into this because it's a topic that I've been seeing a lot lately. It's like, what do you think makes the difference between having visibility on information and having an actual insight or an actual, action item that you can do? What do you think makes that difference for, especially in FinOps for hybrid?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the visibility piece is, arguably, well, it's hard for a start, but, visibility for me is not just ingestion of the cloud bill, but it's actually contextualization of the bill, or SaaS or data center or data cloud, whatever it might be. So how do I get to a show back perspective, right? That would be visibility solved for me. And of course, all of the metadata challenges and everything else become a problem there. But until you can get to that point, just ingesting it, whilst you might say, okay, well, the bill is visible, do you have any insight, right? The insight comes from the business context that we try and lay over the top of that. And we're challenged of doing that in public cloud. Tagging is probably the hardest part of the job for a lot of people to get right. But if we're not looking at those costs in the context of my business and what I'm using those resources to deliver as business outcomes, the insight is purely maybe useful from a procurement perspective, i.e. this is the aggregate of my spend, but actually to take any meaningful decisions and lead that into business drivers and other things is very difficult. And then, of course, the problem then becomes compounded because metadata, business context, units of consumption, they all start to differ as we then go into SaaS and data center and everything else, right? So now we've got 4 sources of metadata that we need to normalize. And I'm hopeful that things like the focus standard are really going to help us deal with that, right? If we can get that common taxonomy across sources of data, that's at least going to get you started, because normalization is again a really big problem there alongside the metadata. We do have some customers that are using Focus for their on-premises infrastructure, for example, which I think is fantastic, right? That's exactly the way to go. So
I think I think that was the goal of Focus, right? Or that's when I understood the Focus. When I studied it, that was the idea, and I saw it like I first saw it like open API for big cloud billing data, which is like I come from a developer perspective, so I was easily for me to why didn't this appear before? It's like it's something that is normalized, and you know how to do APIs, which is probably one of the most widely done things in development, and you have a standard on how to do them. Why don't you have it for billing, right? And what is for me is it really is a challenge. It's like you have so many now out of the cloud. You have different cost drivers as we've discussing today that are super different in the way that they are counted. The only thing that they have in common is that they they apply to your budget. So at the end of the month, they will probably remove some money from your budget, apart from the value that they generate, right? But that have in common, but the way that they generate these this quantity is super different from one to the other. So if Focus is doing that, like for SaaS, for on-prem, the moment that it can be done easily that way, we have a very powerful tool for FinOps in hybrid cloud, which is like probably hybrid cloud, including we discussed AI and SaaS, is the definitive till the moment situation, right? So it's the final, let's say, situation with you cannot get probably more more complex than that right now. Maybe in the future we'll have another cost driver that will appear and we need to count on, I don't know, image generation or video generation or whatever that is different and goes to a different way. So I think that would be the key, right? We have an easy way, which is difficult. Simplify this process is super difficult, where everyone can okay, let's deploy this, let's have this, let's count everything, let's have a situation, and then okay, from this data, tell me what an insight is, how I can do this, how I can, analyze that data. And I think, AI helps on there. I have to say that I use it for a lot of data analysis. And, having the insight is okay, thank you. This is what I was asking for. I hope that you are accurate, but I think that this would be ideal if you are, you can give me the number, right?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting challenge. And yeah, well, AI, as you say, may be part of the problem. We had a conversation with some of our product teams recently just about taxonomy for AI services. And they surprised me because we're actually using AI to classify AI, right?
Yeah.
So we've got a model that looks at it and says that's an AI service or whatever, right? So a bit of a circular reference there, but interesting space. I'm excited. I think, the go forward really, now we've got the focus standard, now we've got the framework that is applicable to all of the scopes. These are really good building blocks to build on top of, and continue to remember the principles of collaborating, of course, with other members. It is really the kind of key to solving these problems. So
That's true, and we've been talking about a lot about AI, all different tools or more technical things, but one of the things that I think it's one of the core drivers and the core drivers of success for a FinOps practice is the people, right? So after all, people are the ones that are doing this implementation, developing all this stuff, learning the new things, adapting to the new model. So for companies, what is your perspective on how they should structure themselves for solving the hybrid FinOps challenge on your perspective?
yeah, no, it's a great question, and again, I think the collaboration is the key. But how you achieve that in an organization can be very different, right? So small organizations, agile, nimble, whatever you want to call it, small relatively number of people, then it's easy to kind of break down barriers and collaborate and sit around a chair or a room, to have these kind of conversations. But recognizing, of course, as you scale that out and you get to large multinational or government organizations, then often there isn't the process or the ability necessary to break down those barriers. It becomes a lot more challenging. And so I think we have to recognize, as part of that kind of framework, some of the complexities of the political landscape ultimately that you might be operating in, and how you break down those silos, right? It's a big part of I guess building a new FinOps practice is the stakeholder management and mapping and other things, and it becomes ultimately more important here. So it's about change at the end of the day, and I think it's really looking at your organization and saying, well, how do we deliver change and how do we manage change across what may be a very large organization with multiple stakeholders and lots of politics and other things in play. So seek the collaboration, but recognize that the challenges that your specific organization may have in helping you achieve that. We see organizations where SaaS or ITAM and FinOps all report into the same leader, and they're very, very successful. But we see organizations where that's true and they're still struggling, right? Yeah. And we see conversely organizations where they've got separate ITAM and FinOps teams reporting into different parts of the business, but they've been very able to kind of collaborate and work together. So executive sponsorship always going to be the key here. Understand the mandate, and maybe AI and the value of AI is one of those drivers to helping your exec help get alignment across the organization and pull people into a room, so that they can ultimately work on the problem together.
Yeah, that's true, and I think what you mentioned is very specific, that each organization need to have the system and the context and the structure that works for them, and it doesn't have to be a generic thing. You have guidance that you can take a look and check, especially if you're doing the new practice. But of course, you need to adapt to your own infrastructure or your own structure, the way that you think, so that you can develop the best practice for your company, right? And talking more of in a practitioner level, is that for people that are maybe a company of them, their company is expanding to on-prem and to hybrid cloud, or maybe there are new SaaS because of an expansion of an MIA incorporation, which is something that normally drives a problem to integrate different providers. What is your advice, if you have one, for these people that may now encounter a transition between cloud to hybrid cloud?
Yeah, I mean, again, it's kind of share and communicate what you have, right? So there'll be silos within that organization that don't know anything about the public cloud and the licenses that you're running in public cloud and the marketplace costs and AI costs that you have running in cloud, right? So, they're as kind of blind or blinkered as you are, right, in terms of visibility of the overall picture. And they're going to be just as pleased to see you pop up and say, hey, I can help. I've got some visibility of the data clouds that we're consuming, right? Does that sit within SaaS or FinOps? Well, maybe it doesn't really matter right now, but we'll get together and solve the problem. So recognize that there's a lot of value there, and find the team members in other areas that are trying to solve that same problem, right? You can do that collaboration, at the bottom levels as much as you can have it, as a top-down mandate from the exec. But it's again about bringing the value that you have and sharing the data. I also think as a FinOps practitioner that you're arguably better placed than anybody else, understanding the concepts of cloud and the complexities of cloud, but understanding the framework, right? Because we're recognizing that is actually a pretty good playbook for us to work through these things, and so sharing your experiences there with colleagues in other areas of the business is super valuable too.
Yeah, that's true. I think the collaboration and the communication and being able to present the information properly, I think it's probably one of the soft skills that you value the most in FinOps, because you are going to be talking about and sharing with a lot of different personas, and being able to adapt the context and the pitch and the information that you share to the specific audience that you have, talk their language, which is one of the most shared in FinOps. I think it's crucial, and I think that's super valuable advice. So yeah, Jeremy, it's been a pleasure. I think you're going to share a lot of value with us on the 13th of November, right?
Yeah, very much looking forward to that, and appreciate the opportunity to come on for the second time today, Victor. A fabulous conversation as always. So very excited to continue that on the 13th, with you and Gerhard as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a wonderful conversation. So if you don't want to miss it, please check the link below so you can register. Jeremy, it's a pleasure and an honor that you are the first repeater of FinOps Weekly podcast. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I hope we have helped a lot of people with your insights on how to do this challenge, and more information on that will be the 13th of November. So thanks a lot for coming, and see you in the next episode.
Thanks, Victor. Pleasure. Take care.
Pleasure. Bye-bye.